Hello, everyone. The topic of conversation, of course, in politics is the end to the governmental shutdown. And there's tremendous frustration, especially coming from the Democratic side, that the shutdown has ended. I wrote an essay, however, on September 25th to the Daily Kos blogging site, and I posed the question in that essay, so what is the end game of this governmental shutdown? And I asked the community to respond, and I got lots and lots of responses, but I have to say that I didn't find any of the responses very satisfactory, and I'll explain that as I go here. The response in terms of, who won is been represented on both sides. Tim Miller on his podcast said yesterday, unequivocally, that the Democrats won. He got a lot of blowback about that. And there have been a number of headlines, for instance, that have said very specifically, the Democratic Party capitulated. And I've seen that represented over and over again. And I'm going to tell you, quite frankly, that that's just flat wrong. The Democratic Party did not capitulate. They hung out for 42 days, the longest governmental shutdown in the United States history. What happened was 8 Democrats in the Senate, actually 7 Democrats and 1 independent, finally broke from the Democratic caucus and decided to end the shutdown. So the party itself hung together. Now, the argument has also been floated that, well, the Democrats just gave up and they got nothing in return. Again, I'm going to say that's wrong. Why is it wrong? Well, first of all, Lawrence O'Donnell on his program on MSNBC last night pointed out very specifically that the SNAP program, which used to be called food stamps, was extended for a year under the bill that was finally passed. But more than that, they actually increased the amount of benefits under the SNAP program. Second of all, he pointed out that 4,000 federal workers were reinstated in their jobs who had been let go. Third, all federal workers who had been laid off during the governmental shutdown were given back pay. Now, you may recall that, of course, there were court cases about whether the back pay would actually occur because Trump and the Republicans were seeming to renege on that. And it looked like the lower courts and the courts of appeal probably would have supported the back pay. But who knows what would have happened at the Supreme Court level, because we can't count on the Supreme Court to do anything but support Trump at this point. So that was a positive. But I'm going to say that the biggest positive that we got out of this shutdown, which tends to be pretty much ignored, and that is that the Democrats set the agenda. For once, the Democrats did a really good job of framing the issues. Usually what the Democrats do on these kinds of controversies is that they get too involved in too many different policies, and so it all gets messy and people don't really know what they're standing for. In this case, they honed in on one issue and one issue alone, and that was extending the subsidies for the ACA, for what has been called Obamacare, and arguing that if you don't extend those subsidies, people's insurance premiums are going to skyrocket. And we know that to be true. And they hung on that issue and said that that's the reason for why they, in fact, shut the government down with the filibuster. Americans will feel the pain now, and I'm confident that many of them will have buyer's remorse if they voted for Republicans and they voted for Trump in the last elections, because they're going to start realizing that the Republicans, because of the effectiveness of the Democrats in honing in on that issue, and that issue alone for 42 straight days, have made it very clear that the Republicans support increasing the premiums on health care, doubling or tripling, or in some cases quadrupling those premiums. And people are going to feel that when it starts on January 1st. The other point I would make is, for all of the comments that people somewhat glibly make is that, well, the Democrats should have held out, the Republicans would finally have capitulated, and I say hogwash, that just wasn't going to happen. And if the Republicans actually at some point did crack and give in and vote to end the government shutdown by capitulating to the Democrats, Trump would have obviously, I think, just vetoed it, and then you'd be back to square one. But another point historically, and I have a degree in history, so I like to talk about historical context. No major shutdown in the history of the United States has ever worked. So you can go back, for instance, and take a look at especially the major shutdowns. So let's talk about in 1995, when Newt Gingrich was the majority leader for the Republicans, they instituted a government shutdown over balancing the federal budget. And it was a disaster. And finally, at one point, Senator Robert Dole said, "This is ridiculous." And he said, "We've got to call it quits." And they capitulated, and they got nothing for it. Absolutely nothing. In 2013, the Republicans tried again. They shut the government down over Obamacare. They wanted to weaken it in two specific ways. They got nothing. They had to capitulate. And so here again, what we're talking about in 2018, Trump asked for almost $6 billion for his border wall, and he didn't get it. And they had to capitulate. Eventually, they negotiated after the government shutdown didn't prove to be successful. And eventually, Trump did get $1 billion for his wall, but he didn't get anything close to what he had demanded. So the last point I'd like to make is that Trump started talking about getting rid of the filibuster, or what is called the nuclear option. And some people have said, well, that would be a good thing. Let's get rid of the filibuster. Let's have Republicans ram it through, end the shutdown, and then everything will be blamed on the Republicans. And initially, I thought that might have been a pretty good idea, but I got to thinking about that, and I said, if you go the nuclear option and you get rid of the filibuster, then how do we protect Obamacare? Because the Republicans control the House, they control the Senate, and they control the presidency. And if you don't have the filibuster to stop the vote to get rid of Obamacare, then how are Democrats supposed to stop that? So that would not have been good to push that to the very end when Trump was lobbying so heavily among the Republicans to use the nuclear option and get rid of the filibuster and end the government shutdown. So for all these reasons, my conclusion is this. I think the Democrats went as far as they could. I think they demonstrated that they really, in fact, in this case, really could fight Trump and the Republicans to pretty much the bitter end as far as they could go, logically. But more importantly, they have set themselves up for the 2026 election by making the issue of the ACA and the premium insurance increases and affordability as a absolutely critical issue. And if they really push that issue constantly and relentlessly, I think the Democrats will win a landslide victory in 2026 election. If you like this video, please subscribe and indicate that you like it. Thank you.